The International Transport Forum welcomes you to the 2013 Summit on Funding Transport.
And I welcome you to this plenary session. My name is Michael Portillo, your moderator for this session, and we are discussing now defining spending priorities, what comes first. And we're invited to discuss the balance that there might be between new infrastructure and maintaining existing infrastructure, what the balance might be between different modes of transport, and how we would factor into all of this social and environmental priorities that might be held by governments. For me, I think a key question that's going to be dominating the afternoon is the extent to which any of these decisions is made in an entirely logical way. Are we following cost-benefit ratios when we make these decisions, or are we perhaps impelled by political decision-making, the need to satisfy certain constituencies? Are we responding to powerful lobby groups? When we decide upon environmental and social objectives, are we doing so in a reasonably scientific way? It'll be very interesting to hear not only from the panel how they address some of those issues, but I hope from members of the audience too, because the session will be interactive. We certainly have a great panel to be discussing these issues. There are 6 that I'm going to ask them in a moment all come to the stage. First of all, Doris Leutard, who is a federal councillor in Switzerland with responsibility for environment, transport, energy and communications. We're very pleased indeed to welcome Keishe Ando. He is the president of the New Kansai International Airport Company in Japan. Rachel Kite, vice president of Sustainable Development, the World Bank. Bob Lettany, he's the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Aviation and International Affairs in the United States Department of Transportations. Terje Gustavsson, he's the Director General of National Public Roads Administration in Norway. And Michael Klausecher, who is the Chairman of the Management Board, Bombardier Transportation in Germany. Will you please give a big warm welcome to our panel, please? And given that Rachel Kite is from the World Bank, I thought we might begin with what I think is going to be quite a global perspective, perhaps picking up on some of those themes we saw in the video there about the importance that transport has really for sustainable life and for the battle against poverty in the world. Rachel, would you like to kick off the subject for us this afternoon, please?
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much. Very pleased to be here. Yeah, I think there's a very good introductory video. I mean, transport, however we finance it at the end of the day, is how a kid gets to school. Increasingly, it's about how a kid gets to school safely. 250,000 kids get killed on the roads every day just walking to school, every year walking to school. It's about how you get to healthcare. It's about how you move stuff around. It's about how you get food to market. It's about trade. It's about the competitiveness of countries, the competitiveness of regions within countries. So it's been the bread and butter of the World Bank Group for more than 60 years, but it's really the lifeblood of economies going forward. And so not only funding it in general, but then working out what you fund first, or what the strategic approach to transport is, really increasingly we see is defining the way in which a country can sort of navigate its growth. I think there's some important trends going forward which we haven't necessarily all experienced in the past, and urbanisation, I think, is one of the biggest ones. Over the next 20 years we're going to put another 2 billion people in cities. A lot of those people are going to be poor. Cities are the poles of competitiveness within a country. It's where a lot of the growth comes from. And so the transport infrastructure is what defines, it's the skeleton of a city. It's what defines how that city will grow. And so planning the transport infrastructure that will move people around in a safe and healthy way is going to be fundamental. So by that I mean this has to be low carbon transport. 80% of global carbon emissions come from cities. 75% of the people are going to live there. We're going to have to grapple with this at the city level. You don't have to make the global public good of carbon reduction the main point. If we do it in a low carbon way, it means the kids that go to school on the bus, the kids that grow up and go to work on the bus rapid transit will be able to breathe, and they'll be healthy, and they will grow, and they won't be stunted. So there's an immediate private health good to good transport planning. So I think that there is a conundrum about how we do that for the cities of today and the future. That's spend in transport in cities that already exist, which is extremely expensive in refitting. But we're going to be building a lot more cities in the future, and those cities are going to grow very rapidly, and getting their urban skeleton is absolutely, I think, fundamental. Maybe I should leave it there.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Can I ask you, what proportion of GDP should countries ideally be spending on their transport? And if you're able to answer that question, what kind of a funding gap does that suggest that we are looking at the moment, particularly for developing countries?
Well, the rule of thumb is countries should spend between 3 and 4% of GDP on transport infrastructure. As an international community, we're running behind in general. I mean, most countries are spending 1, 1.5, 2, if you're lucky. Of course, China has outstripped most countries by investing 4 or 5 in recent years. And so when you look at, so growth has been slowing down globally, but, you know, we've got countries running GDP growth at 6, 7%. So the actual investment in transport has to be quite substantial. Now, what's the gap in funding? The gap is calculated just in transport infrastructure over the next 10 years at about $3 to $4 trillion. I think that's slightly more expensive when you consider that it has to be resilient transport systems, because we're going to experience more and more natural disasters. You're going to have sea level rise, you're going to have cities flooding and things like that. So you have to factor in the cost of resilience. But, you know, the gap is quite substantial. I mean, the multilateral development banks last year pledged to spend $175 billion of our own capital on transport over the next decade, and that was a big announcement. So you can see the gap between us and where we need to be, and why our money, I think, is important. That's all of us, not just the World Bank, is because that's the public money that can be leveraged to crowd in private financing. That's the concessional money that can help buy down the risk, as we talked about as ministers this morning. So it's a big gap. So
$3 to $4 trillion over 10 years. That's the same as saying, is it $300 to $400 billion too little being spent each year, in your view?
Absolutely.
Okay. Very, very good. Okay, I'm going to hear from Doris Leutard next. Amongst the considerations that I mentioned earlier, you know, lobbies and political pressures and so on, I didn't mention international pressures, but I imagine for a country like Switzerland, international pressures are another of the things that come to play, because you are at the crossroads of Europe. But anyway, Doris, over to you, please. You're very welcome.
Well, I think it's perhaps in transportation a little bit vice versa, because Switzerland, we have a long history in investment in transportation. Our railway system is the densest of the world. So actually, we always had this geographical position, and as a small country, we invested for years in transportation, because it was recognized very soon that it's also part of our competitiveness. And when you look at the World Economic Forum, the report and the ranking, infrastructure is one of the 5 criteria that you regain also growth and a good position as an economic place to invest. So therefore, for us, it's a long history. But I think it's special because in Switzerland, for many years, we decided to prioritize the railway system. because 70% of our people are living in cities or close by. So the railway is the most efficient way to transport people, energy-wise, or because of the amount of people you can transport in short time. And therefore, we just had the issue how you can organize that and that is affordable for everybody. And we had, as a small country, the pressure was long, either road or railway system. So there were also battles between the organizations and between the different sectors. So we had to overcome that we have a common transport view, that we use the best of each transport system, may it be airports, may it be railways, may it be the road. So the intermodality and a good split of transporting goods and transporting people, I think that's quite a strategic question of every government, and this needs a planning, this needs a view where you see your country. This must be different also from country to country, but it must interlink between the countries. And therefore, we had this planning for many years. We invest probably 4% of our GDP or more, because, well, we have to do that. And in a world where mobility is increasing, where we have no other choice we have the responsibility as a government to have enough capacities for tomorrow. Otherwise, you have every year more congestions. This is economic damage, finally. You have to find a smart system also of the transportation of goods. With globalization, with e-commerce, we have more and more goods coming all over the world. So here we give a preference to the railway system because, again, then more cars have place on the roads, and for the transit passenger, the transit goods, the railway system has a clear priority also on the investment side. Perhaps I stop here for the moment.
Doris, Switzerland is a very special place for all sorts of reasons, not least the railways. Switzerland came quite late to railways by comparison with other European countries, but then has embraced them very, very warmly. I think since about 1900, railways have been electrified in Switzerland. It's really an extraordinary story. You talk about battles between roads and railways, and then you talk about a strategic plan. So can you confidently say now that Switzerland has put this battle behind it, that you really do have a strategic plan, that enjoys a consensus amongst the Swiss population?
Yes, I think so, because, well, you know, with our democracy we have a lot of popular votations, and our population so far decided the priorities or the investments in the railway system, but a part of that they always accepted also the investment on the road side. And they think, well, we agree also that part of the money of the taxes on the roads are going in the railway infrastructure. This was also agreed because it's part of a strategic plan. So today I think the world is really intermodal. A lot of young people, they use, well, in the morning perhaps from their home, they take the bus to the railway station, or some people prefer the car to the railway station, or they prefer the car going to business, and in the afternoon they go to visit the family with the train. So really it's up to you to make your choice, and the preference here is a private decision. But the government really offers similar prices, similar infrastructure, that you have really a good choice.
I think Switzerland may turn out to be the envy of many countries, having this very settled strategic plan, which apparently has also achieved public consensus. I'm now going to ask Mr. Keishe Ando to speak to us. He's going to be speaking in Japanese, so you may wish to prepare your translation devices. Mr. Ando represents the new Kansai International Airport, and there is a booth, there is an exhibit on the airport which you may wish to visit if you want to get more details. But Mr. Ando, over to you, please.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. My name is Ando, President of a new Kansai International Airport Company. And perhaps you are not very familiar with my company, so let me briefly explain to you how my company was founded. And originally in Japan, there are several big airports, and in Osaka, which is the second largest city in Japan, there are two airports. One is Itami Airport, that is a domestic urban type of airport, and the other one is a Kansai International Airport, that is an island airport. And this Itami Airport was located in a close vicinity to the central part of Osaka. Therefore, there was a noise pollution, and on top of that, it was also necessary to cover the increasing amount of demand. However, Itami Airport was not able to handle everything. Therefore, the idea came out to construct a new airport off the coast. And this airport was built by reclaiming a sea with the depths of about 20 meters. And the total investment exceeded 20 billion US dollars. And as a result of this, of course, this investment was covered by the government, but this interest-bearing debt was actually a burden for the management. And some measures needed to be taken to reduce the debt burden. And that is how my company was founded, with the 100% ownership of the public sector. However, the half board members are coming from the private sector. Therefore, this is a semi-private company. And these two airports, Itami and Kansai, were merged together, in other words, in terms of management. So my company is managing and operating a plural number of airports, and it is very necessary to enhance corporate value. And as part of our efforts, the operating right can be sold. In other words, this concession can be sold to private sector, and thereby reducing the total debt. And at the same time, we wanted to seek know-how's private sector. And if this idea turned out to be successful, currently there are 27 airports managed and operated by the public sector, but the government intends to use this method of concession applying to 27 airports. And from the building up this infrastructure, the operation is going to be more important than constructing the large this infrastructure. And for that purpose, we have to ensure the cash flow of the operability of such large-scale infrastructure. Therefore, there's a room for the private sector investment and the private sector participation. However, on the other hand, as you are all aware, that the large East Japan earthquake took place, and we have to pay more attention to infrastructure as an important asset. And we have to ensure the safety and the security of the people. And for that purpose, infrastructure is indispensable. And public sector investment was viewed as rather negatively because wasteful projects, including unnecessary airports or unnecessary ports, were built in the past, and that was also part of the reasons why there's a huge amount of fiscal debt of the government. However, in the future, we have to change more like a 21st century oriented investment based on the consensus of the people. This is an important factor. So probably we observe the shift of ideas. So if we try to divide between advanced countries and developing countries, as you are all aware that there are some Asian countries achieving a great this economic growth, But the big, large infrastructure project should not be a constraint of the economic growth. Earlier, we talked about this equality and the this poverty alleviation and so on. But when it comes to emerging countries, of course, operations are an important side. But we have to exercise the most advanced technologies and try to achieve harmonized mobility toward the 21st century. Thank you.
Ms. Andor, from looking at your exhibition outside, it seems that you've attracted a low-cost carrier. I think you've attracted FedEx. Where are you going to go next with the commercial side of the airport? Where are you going to find the growth opportunities in future?
Yes. In the past, there was a nature of a public sector investment. In other words, there's no involvement of the public sector. And also, the Kansai International Airport had a big burden, and that actually hindered the strategic way of investing money. So compared to overseas countries, the landing fee is relatively high, and this turned out to be a bottleneck to expand airline networks. But now my company is a semi-private company, and we reduced the landing fee by 5%. By doing so, the airline networks will serve to increase the number of passengers using this airport, and this would actually result in the better profitability, as exemplified by SCC. Or we also have their strategy to improve the cargo carrier data center. So we are now taking a very positive strategies. And in view of the idea of a concession, we are still in the halfway. And so total privatization needs to be achieved in the future. By doing so, we could improve the profitability in the future. That is my expectation. Thank you.
Our fourth speaker is Bob Lettany, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Aviation and International Affairs in the US Department of Transportation. So it may be that we're staying with the subject of aviation, but I'm not quite sure. Sorry, Bob.
Thank you. My background is more on the surface side, so
right.
but I am working aviation. Thanks for having me. I think roundtables like this are really important. It's important for us in the U.S. to hear what's going on around the world, and we've just had a great time here so far. And I think this panel is particularly relevant as far as how people are investing limited budgetary resources in transportation infrastructure. I'd like to comment on, make just a few points about what we're doing in the U.S. First, I'd like to give a little bit of background on how we're set up, how we finance our infrastructure, and how we prioritize what we're funding. Within those priorities, I'd like to focus on two issues which I think are relevant to this panel. The first is state of good repair, and the second is livable communities. And then I'll just quickly end with some of the challenges we're facing. We're funded in the U.S. with a combination of gas tax revenue and general fund general tax revenue. And right now, highways and transit, we spend about $50 billion per year on both of those, $40 billion for highways, about $10 billion for transit. Funny enough, that's also the divide between the Highway Trust Fund and gas tax revenues, about $40 billion and $10 billion, though it's mixed among the modes. Within those two modes, we have 5 priority areas. The first is safety. First and foremost, we're a safety agency at the Department of Transportation. The second is state of good repair. The third is economic competitiveness. The fourth is livable communities, and the fifth is environmental sustainability. Again, I'd like to just focus on 2, which is the state of good repair. Taking transit, again, we have about $10 billion for transit. $8 billion, 80% of that, goes into state of good repair, and we have $2 billion for new construction. There is broad flexibility on the state level, which I'll get to in the highway section, where they don't have to use it for state of good repair, but the bulk of those funds are used for state of good repair. On the highway side, we're about a $40 billion program. Again, there is broad state flexibility. I think when you're talking about the United States, you have to keep in mind the federal nature of our system. At the federal level, we set sort of very broad guidelines on how funds can be spent, and then it really is up to the states to decide how they're going to spend those. They can go into state of good repair, or they can go into new construction. What's significant is for the first time, we are setting up performance measures. So the chap from the Economist yesterday was mentioning about our structurally deficient bridges. So we will start to hold states more accountable for how they're spending their transportation dollars. Priorities will be given to pavement condition, bridge condition, transit systems. We have an $80 billion backlog. The bulk of that are in our oldest transit systems, Chicago, Boston, New York. So we will start to have performance measures which will be instituted hopefully early next year, where states will need to report up on how they're meeting certain targets. The second thing I wanted to mention was livable communities. It's a huge priority for the President, for Secretary LaHood, for the Department. We've tried to emphasize livable communities in each mode. In the case of highways, it's more pedestrian-friendly walking paths, sidewalks, making sure that roads are built that are bike-friendly. In the transit area, in cases where we're doing new construction, in the previous administration, if your cost-benefit ratio didn't sort of pan out, that was the be-all, end-all of your project. And what we're trying to do, while cost-benefit is very important, we're also trying to bring in those other externalities that are difficult to capture, but we're trying to, such as environmental considerations, impact on congestion, CO2 emissions. And then we're really trying in DOT across the modes to have them not have a siloed approach, to have integrative planning, to communicate with one another. I had mentioned the federal nature of our system. The one exception to that is we have a unique program at the department called the Tiger Program, which is basically a discretionary grant program where states, localities, cities, towns can come in and apply for funding directly through the department. And we've really tried to support and encourage a lot of the great work and innovation that's been going on at the local level when it comes to livable communities, when it comes to ensuring that your road and your transit center are all sort of integrated. We have a partnership with Housing and Urban Development. I'll give you just quickly one example in Kansas City. Downtown Kansas City, 50-block radius, a place called the Green Impact Zone. I personally went down there. You couldn't walk on the sidewalks. You couldn't get to the stores. They were so out of shape. No bus shelters. And so we put in investments for new sidewalks, new curbing, more transit service, bus shelters, new bridges, to make it a more appealing, more walkable area where folks could, I'm relatively young and healthy, and I was having a tough time, but elderly folks, kids coming back from school would have a livable community. So that's one thing that we're trying to do. And let me just close with some of our challenges. I had the opportunity to speak on a rail panel yesterday, and we had a very good conversation about what different countries are doing as far as intercity and high-speed rail. And I think when we look at transportation, it's really, when it comes to passengers, moving passengers, it's really a four-legged stool. You've got your highways, you've got your transit, your buses, you've got aviation. And the fourth leg of that stool is really intercity rail and high-speed rail. And I think historically, until the Obama administration, we had underinvested in intercity rail. But starting with President Obama and Secretary LaHood, we have made record investments for the United States, $10 billion so far, in intercity rail. And the President has put forward a proposal to have sustained funding, $40 billion for 5 years into the future, to keep that momentum going, all in the effort to have a balanced transportation system where you do have options among all four of those modes. But one of our challenges is getting that plan passed through Congress. Thanks.
Bob, we've got this far in the discussion without mentioning cuts. It's as though we were discussing a world in which all the budgets were growing and we were just deciding how to spend all this lovely money. But actually, we live in a very different sort of world. And I noticed from your resume that you have been, I think in your previous job, you were working on how to implement budgetary cuts. So, okay, let's turn the question around and say, okay, when you are implementing budgetary cuts, how do you apply priorities?
Well, I think in that case, I mean, we've set sort of 5 macro areas. We are in a time of limited budgets, but it's in the transportation area, it's really been sort of flat. The $40 billion for highways, the $10 billion for transit. My work, it's a little non sequitur, but my work in the U.S., we were forced to do something called sequestration, where it was really just a blunt object where indiscriminate cuts sort of across the board. They did not impact the highway system because trust-funded accounts were not impacted by that. Huge impact on the aviation system. Huge controversy where you probably read in the papers where we had delays at our airports, air traffic controllers being furloughed. And in that case, it was a situation of trying to balance your human capital with the contracts and the impact on the system. And I think the thing that we tried to balance on the aviation side was minimizing the impact on the system. As it turned out, there was still impact on the system because of the way sequester was done. But Congress passed a law to allow us to move money around, so it was solved. They didn't like waiting in the airports any more than anybody else did. On the surface side, as far as the cuts against highways was not impacted, and programmatically on the transit side there was some impact, particularly on our New Starts programs. And those projects will still go forward, but they'll be slightly delayed, and they'll have to get catch-up funding in the next year. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Bob. Michael Klausecker is next. He's the chairman of the management board, Bombardier Transportation, Germany.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here to you today. I'd like to elaborate first on the balance of allocation of funds between construction of new infrastructure and maintenance. And here in Germany, where you would be surprised, but budgets are very tight, and Germany has been for a long period of time underinvesting, in particular in the rail infrastructure. After long years of debate, I think today there is political consensus on a clear set of priorities. Priority number 1 is maintenance of infrastructure. And for maintenance, multi-annual funds play a very important role. For a number of years we have them now, and have been very successful. Our customer, Deutsche Bahn, has been able to procure much more construction, signaling systems, track renewal with the same amount of money. If they don't have to respect the annual budgets and wait for procurement until the annual budget is there. Before we had multi-annual funds, we received, let's say, 3/4 of the annual orders in the last quarter of the year, and that put, of course, a lot of pressure on everybody. Second priority is elimination of bottlenecks and extension of existing capacity. And here, of course, this is not only about extension of hardware, but software also plays a very important role. New advanced signaling systems are very often the most efficient, most economic way to provide additional capacity on existing infrastructure. And third priority then is the new build of additional connections, new opportunities, new build for new capacity. Now, a second point I'd like to, well, you asked me before to elaborate a bit on best practices for the allocation of funds. And I only like to share 2 observations I have. The first with regard to PPPs. Now, very often governments tend to spend their governments out of their budget investments into those infrastructures, those things that have to be done anyway, the straightforward investments. And then when it comes to new projects, new investment, those things that could enable growth for the country, that could provide better connections between big cities, then they consider PPPs. Now, unfortunately, usually creating these PPPs, establishing them, takes a long period of time, a lot of debate, because a lot of risk is in such projects. And governments discover that for every piece of risk, you have to pay a premium. And that makes these projects difficult, expensive, sometimes even unbankable. And I wonder why we can't manage to turn that around. Why can't we use PPPs to finance the straightforward projects where revenues are clear and easy to access, where risk premiums can be much lower, and use government funds on the other side for those projects that are more risky and where private financing is much more difficult to achieve. And a second observation, and that is an observation on the particular case of Central and Eastern Europe during the last 15 years. Now, after the Iron Curtain fall, money was available, a lot of European money, to develop the transport infrastructure. And in a number of these countries, you can see today very good highways. So actually, over the last 1.5 decades, the countries spent most of their funds to build roads, and very little money to build or improve the railway system. Now, what happened was a massive shift in modes, a massive shift from rail to road. Of course, building roads has been very popular, but only later governments thought, well, how could they raise funds now to also do something on the railway side? And of course, once the highway is there, once people are using it, it's a much more difficult debate to implement tolling systems. And again, I wonder why wouldn't governments think of let's say of those projects that can be more easily financed through tolling systems, also through PPP, highways, and if in some of these countries in Central and Eastern Europe these considerations would have taken place 15 years ago, today the rail infrastructure would certainly be in much better shape. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So, was it basically politics that drove politicians in the former Eastern Europe to opt for roads rather than railways? And let me put a supplementary question. You've really identified a couple of really interesting matters of practice, moving from annual funding to multi-annual funding, and also, as it were, reversing the PPP. So using PPPs for basic bread and butter sort of infrastructure, using public funds for the stuff that's more risky. Give me an assessment, if you would, as to how well received this message is by politicians. Sounds as if you probably won on the multi-annual funding, but that you haven't yet won on the point about, as it were, reversing the PPPs.
Well, with reversing PPPs, we have some experience, well, here in my home turf in Germany. Years ago, there was a very risky PPP launched. That was the Warnow Tunnel. Some people may know that one, and actually didn't work out because people rather has been established in one of the poorest regions of Germany. People rather than paying €5 to use the tunnel, use the 10 or 12 kilometers circumvention through the Warnow Delta and ran into Rostock and continue to drive into Rostock that way. And that has brought PPP investment in Germany nearly to a halt. And only after years the government launched projects again, much more simpler projects, in particular projects for highways and rebuild and extension of highways. And they work very well. They work very simple. We have the tolling system in place. You can before you launch the project, you can count the number of cars that run on the highway every day, every week, every year. So they are very straightforward to calculate, to finance. Risk is very low.
Okay, so that sounds quite encouraging, that the governments are doing two things that you think they ought to be doing. They've kind of got the message on multi-annual funding and on simple projects for PPP. Our last panel on the list is Terje Gustavsen. He's from the National Public Roads Administration in Norway.
Thank you. As you know, Norway is a country that is well situated, not least due to the oil. But still, we have to meet our challenges concerning infrastructure and transport patterns. We work towards goals in areas of efficiency, transport, traffic safety, environmental challenges, and universal design. And our planning is based on a 10 years perspective, updated every 4 years. And the latest plan has a big increase of 50% compared to current planning period. And the government plans to spend around 70 billion with B euro in the coming 10 years. And that provides a significant growth both in investment and maintenance for all transport modes. In theory, the right balance in allocation of funds between construction and maintenance is always to provide for maintenance of existing infrastructure before making new investments. But this has proven to be quite challenging. The desire to make new investment has shown to be strong both on the political and the administrative side. And new complex tunnels and other road elements have shown to require more maintenance and reinvestments than expected. And the last decades, the need for maintenance has been underestimated and may be also prioritized too low in Norway. A situation I think my administration has to take a big share of the responsibility for. And this result is a large backlog in the Norwegian infrastructure, both for roads and railways. During the last 3 years, we have put a lot of effort and work in finding the right level of funding for maintenance. And the National Transport Plan 1423 stipulates these allocations and the funding from all maintenance is increased considerably. And it is also created an account in order to reduce the backlog. In Norway, railways are financed by public funding exclusively. Operations and maintenance in roads are financed by public funding as well. But investments in roads are financed by public funding and toll revenue, half and half, I think. In cities, revenue from the toll rings can also finance parts of public transport. Sea transport and airports are financed partly by revenues and incomes and partly by public funding. Looking at the incentives for the side allocation of transport between modes, so it is efficient transport, environmental standards, safety standards, traffic management, total volume of transport and tax on transport in neighboring countries is important for us. As said earlier, in Norway we have goals for effective transport, safety, environment, universal design, and of course the allocation of funds should take into account all of these objectives. When it comes to environmental and social aspects, we have taken some important steps in our most recent national transport plan. The growth in transport of persons in the cities has to be absorbed by public transport, walking and cycling, and more of the long-distance freight transport must shift from roads to rail and sea. In theory, the best practice should be use of payment equal to external cost, but in practice we have different taxes and fees and charges that cover part of external cost, and the toll roads in all major cities in Norway help us to cover external cost, but it is not an ideal situation. Thank you.
Terje, very, very interesting. You said that you had a target for the balance between maintenance and new build, but it had been challenging to stick to this for political and administrative reasons, if I understood you. Now, I think I understand what political reasons mean. I think that probably means that politicians quite enjoy high-profile, sexy new projects which respond to the needs of particular constituencies. Firstly, is that what you meant? And secondly, what did you mean by the administrative problem?
Firstly, I have no problem to understand your question because we very often say that it is only the politicians who have the responsibility for that situation. But I think we have to be more frankly. I think the reasons are that we did not see the complexity in new road elements. You have to bear in mind that we built the first subsea tunnel in 1981, and now we have around 30 subsea tunnels. And the lifetime for the equipment in those tunnels is about 20 years. Maybe we thought it could be 30, 40 years, and that's a very, very big maintenance cost. And I think we have to admit that our administration also, in a way, wanted to serve the politicians, maybe a little bit too much. But, as I said, today I think we are a little bit clearer in our role and now serve it in a better way, because I think it is a better way to serve it by telling the real truth. And now we have got the politicians' answer, and that is an increase of the maintenance funding.
And one other quick question. The Norwegian economy continues to do very well. You haven't experienced a recession that most of us have experienced. In an economy that continues to do well, do you spend an increasing proportion of your GDP on transport, or do you simply allow the level of transport spending to rise in line with GDP?
For the time being, it is an increasing part, because if we look at the current level in 2013, I think we are something between 1.5% and 2% of the GDP. And when it comes to, let's say, 2020, and looking at the current, the coming transport plan, we will increase to around 2.3 or 4 or something, a little bit more than 2%.
Yeah, very, very good. Now, we've got about 35 minutes to go in this session, and I'm willing at any time now to take interventions from the floor. In the absence of interventions from the floor, to continue the discussion amongst the panel. But if anybody does want to intervene from the floor, please just put your hand up. Yes, I've got an intervention here. Front row, please, microphone. The microphone is sprinting towards you, sir.
Merci, Michel. Mon nom est Jean-Bernard Kovac.
Thank you very much. I'm Jean-Bernard Communica, and I'm with the French Ministry of Transport. Here at this point, I would like to make a brief contribution in order to show you how important it is today to prioritize. 2 years ago, in the previous French administration, a project was established and presented for a transport route plan, and the accumulated routes for all carriers account for 240 billion euros for 25 years, which is quite a sum for all the public funds available for that. These funds come from the government, the regional, national, and local level, and the Minister of Transport has now decided to establish a committee in order to monitor those projects and give priorities to some of them in order to come up with a forecast. It's a mixed committee because it consists of delegates of all different political directions, but it also consists of qualified persons and experts. The committee is chaired by a delegate who also runs a public funding agency for transport infrastructure. So this committee has been awarded the mandate to carry out an analysis with different criteria. 4 major criteria have been set out. First of all, this is something that comprises the general goals of transport policy, but then it also comprises an evaluation of environmental impacts, then social impacts as well. But we're also talking about spatial planning, balance between regions, connectivity of the rural areas, all these aspects that are very important. And the last and important criteria is the economic feasibility of the projects. Well, of course, nowadays it is almost impossible to foresee and to forecast the results that this committee can achieve. In summer of this year, the results will be presented, but some directions have already been established and the committee has already announced that. So I don't think you will be surprised, because the debate so far has been mentioned in this panel as well. One of the priorities, of course, should be the improvement of the existing infrastructure, that is, maintenance. Why? Well, we think that it is important to remain mobile in everyday life. But that doesn't mean being faster, but being more reliable, probably adding more comfort for the users of day-to-day transport. And of course, it is also about certain special operations that need to be maintained and carried on wherever it is necessary. And last but not least, I would like to add that there is also the area of transport infrastructure that needs a kind of simplification of processes, and hence I think it will also be our task to try to reduce the cost of complexity and eliminate red tape. Thank you.
Just hold on to the microphone for a second, please. May I ask you, what will be the fate of the report from the committee? I mean, is it intended that this becomes, as it were, the national plan, or is it something that then goes back to the political process and might be changed beyond recognition?
Thank you very much for this question. Well, that actually gives me an opportunity to explain that this commission called Mobility 21, that is for the 21st century, is an independent committee. That is, it is independent of the government and it will make proposals to the government. Of course, it is expected that the government that, after all, established this commission will then translate the propositions into actions and will take on board the prioritization that has been suggested and will probably define in concrete terms what needs to be done in the short, medium, and long term. And then, of course, they will take a look at what they can do within the range of public finance, because we all know that there are certain pressures, certain limitations, but we also know what this offers for growth, for an increased dynamic in transport, so as to avoid losing even more time in means of transport. The government will certainly have a political perspective on the topic. Briefly after the results will be presented, and well, more is what we can say in 2013.
Neatly into practice, I'll just comment that in my country, a decision by a minister to establish a committee is something quite different from accepting what the committee actually says at the end. But maybe things work differently in France. In fact, I very much hope they do. Doris, were you hoping to say something?
Well,
yes.
I just would like to support what was told by my colleagues. First, maintenance comes first. And when you have new projects, I think all people in governments know that the projects of infrastructure are much higher than what you really can realize. So prioritization, finding indicators, how you do that, this is a key element of planning. And, well, in my country, we have it for many years because, well, otherwise every region would be disappointed when we don't have a transparent and quite clear system of indicators. I would join also my German colleague on the multi-annual financing. I hear a lot of ministers, colleagues from me, which tell me, well, I have difficulties in planning because, well, I have the restrictions of an annual budget, so the risk that parliaments are cutting my budget. So even if I plan, I have no guarantee that the projects defined among priorities can be realized. And here I think for many governments it would be very, very important because infrastructure financing is long-term financing. So we need to have policies which allow us that we have 4, 10-year, 20 years plan and also the budgets available for that. In Switzerland, that's why we could, with a law which was accepted, turn from annual budgeting to a fund where we have 4 or 5 year plans and all the financing goes in there and we can take over with this prioritization the money which is in the fund. And I think this helps a lot of governments, this helps the industry and this helps realizing all this infrastructure project in quite affordable time. And here I think a lot of governments have to look for legal solution how we can transform the system from annual budgeting to a more reliable financial system with our parliaments.
Yeah, I think that's been a very powerful point. May I just, I just want to go back on another point. We've been talking this afternoon about how we allocate budgets within a transportation budget. But of course there's a separate debate which is how you get the transportation budget in the first place vis-a-vis all the things that the transportation budget needs to compete with. So I thought I might ask Rachel, you have identified this enormous funding gap for transportation, but as the World Bank, you know that there are lots of other things that need to be done to help people out of poverty as well, like, I don't know, clean water, or anti-malarial drug campaigns, or access to justice, transparent systems of finance, the ability to obtain loans, all these sorts of things. So how on earth, in an organisation like the World Bank, do you prioritise where transportation should be vis-a-vis these other programmes?
Well, setting priorities in an institution like ours is a sort of iterative process between what the client wants, what we think and have learned over the years works, and then, hopefully there's a bottom-up, top-down process and it meets in the middle and the client's happy and our shareholders are happy. What I think is clear is that the data and the impact evaluation and sort of the outcome data over the years shows that the investment in infrastructure then is foundational for meeting your food security needs, meeting your energy security needs. So, I mean, it's difficult to imagine a functioning economy, especially in a global economy, without that infrastructure. And so it is very much front of mind for ministers of finance and planning. I think the question is buying yourself the political space, the economic planning space and the fiscal space to be able to invest over the long run. And the points that Doris was making for what developed countries face, I mean, it just gets even more complicated for the developing countries. We've talked a lot about crowding the private sector and immobilising private finance. About 10% of sort of global infrastructure spend came from the private sector in recent years, but that's extraordinarily focused on certain middle-income countries, and that's become even more pronounced after the financial crisis in 2008. And so, if you're a low-income country, perhaps without, good PPP laws, without a certain deficit in governance. You probably don't have transparency necessarily in purchasing decisions, and procurement laws might not be very. I mean, this becomes a very big long-term sort of hand-holding strategy for us and others like us. So I think it's quite complicated. Of the 68 PPPs that reached financial conclusion in 2011, 3 in transport, 3 were in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. And so I think we were talking at lunch, we can all tell you, the great PPPs that happened last year. At some point that has to go beyond anecdote. We're going to have to be at the point where we can't remember because there were so many. So they remain complicated, complex risk management processes.
Bob, I wanted to put to you, we've heard from a couple of countries where, planning really seems to be pretty well organized. The countries have pretty long-term visions and they seem to have a fair amount of consensus. This is not the world that you and I operate in, is it? In as much as we have to deal with very messy constituencies. You alluded to it in passing when you were talking about high-speed intercity rail. You said, yes, but we've got a problem there with Congress. I mean, tell us a bit now about, what it's really like when you've got, a whole lot of people who have been elected from all over the country who are fighting for their bit of the action, and a lot of very powerful lobbies out there. I mean, do you not think that this discussion we've had this afternoon perhaps gives an impression of neatness which you and I might not entirely recognise?
Well, I have to disagree with your premise a little bit. We do have some neatness in the U.S., particularly on the highway and the transit side. Each state comes up with a state transportation improvement plan. It's a multi-year process. It goes out 5-10 years. We do have multi-year funding in the U.S. on the highway and transit side. A typical authorization bill will go 5 to 6 years. Unfortunately, the last bill was only a 2-year bill, but we do have some stability there. The issue we get into is when the authorization expires and we're going from stopgap to stopgap. That really doesn't allow states to do the long-term planning that they want to do on some of these projects because they don't know where the funding is coming from. But as far as getting politics out, there is a very sort of strict process, public process by which states go through with their local communities to get these projects on these funding plans. So it's not as messy as maybe you were under the impression it was.
Michael, I know you were hoping to say something a moment ago, and please do say whatever was coming into your mind. But I'm just thinking that, for example, in the United Kingdom, there's been dispute about whether we should be buying Japanese trains, German trains. So suddenly, you've got all these neat criteria, and suddenly somebody says, wait a minute, we better build trains that are manufactured in the United Kingdom, for example.
I think I wouldn't like to go into that debate. And as a manufacturer, of course, we have our own view on that. But what I really wanted to add is also on the construction of new infrastructures, again, this is a question of prioritization. And actually, the example of France is a very good one. France has managed over a lot of years to focus national budgets for new high-speed railway lines on one line, build that one line, bring it into revenue service, and then construct the next one. And as budgets are scarce everywhere, I think this is a good approach, and we can learn from that. And we have seen a similar approach in Spain, for example, very successful. Now in Germany, where we have this federal system, where we have a lot of priorities when it comes to national infrastructure planning, we are constructing new lines, a number of them at a time. And the result is that the investment is spread over a period of 10, 15, even 20 years to connect this particular city of Leipzig with Berlin on the one side and Munich on the other side. Once the line is there, it will have taken 20, maybe 25 years. And of course, I don't have to tell you that the net present value of an investment depends very much on timing. So you need a short investment period, and as soon as possible, you have to launch the revenue service, so that the net present value of your investment is good. Now, these big infrastructure investments in Germany will probably never come into the black figures considering the investments, simply because the investment phase takes too long. And the totally different approach from countries like Spain or France, or also the UK, I believe is much better, and economically it's certainly better anyway.
I hope the improved line between Berlin and Munich will still use the magnificent Leipzig station, which is an absolute joy. Mr. Andor, yes.
In Japan, I think the construction of infrastructure has been completed. But of course, we still suffer the impact of the great earthquake of 2 years ago. And on the other hand, we have an aging highway network, and there are some accidents in the old tunnels. So the priority goes to the repair work and the maintenance of the existing infrastructure, which, of course, costs a lot of money. Indeed, it is a huge amount of money. Neither the central government or local government cannot provide a sufficient amount of money for this repair and maintenance work. Of course, we will have to invite private money to get the cash flow going. So I think that is the basis, orientation point for our future thinking. So for the future of our infrastructure, of course, we'll have to move into the new model of thinking fit for the 21st century. That means also adjusting our lifestyle, adjusting our values to the new era. We have a new generation growing who is not marrying, who is not eating the way we have been eating, who is living a different kind of lives. The lifestyles are indeed changing. So we have to provide infrastructure that corresponds to the changing lifestyle, changing value system. People look at the infrastructure in another way as before. We have a super high-speed railway between Tokyo and Osaka, but we are now thinking of perhaps a possibility of a superconductive linear connection. And another idea is to construct a deep-sea underground system. All these possibilities must be thought of, must be planned perhaps in a simultaneous way, because that might help further growth in the future. We have to review the way we look at the infrastructure and the way we can introduce the private money to the building of a new infrastructure system. And I'm sure this will trigger a new growth into the 21st century. We may be able to get out of our long-term recession. So I think this should be connected to our growth strategy, in which private money is essential. Of course, that includes building of and maintenance of infrastructure. We need private money. I think that with the private money, we can revitalize our economy.
End of this session. I just want to check, because it's quite a big hall, not easy to see. Yes, we do have someone who would like to intervene from the floor. Could I have a microphone to the front there, please? And just while we're waiting, is there any other hand that I haven't seen yet? Yes, there's one at the back. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I'm Carlos Militeran from the National Bank of Public Works of Mexico. It looks like the strategy to invest in infrastructure is that the railroads should have priority in the intercity transport infrastructure, and also probably in the urban transport. The problem is that the toll roads, the highways, they have already a self-financing strategy by having a lot of cars moving in the roads and a lot of cars moving in the cities. So they have even their self-financing funding. And as in Mexico, we are looking that the toll road network has a surplus that can help to finance more toll roads. And the cities are growing in traffic, so the cars are a very good source to finance new private highways. But the railroads, they don't have that situation. So how can we solve that problem? Because we are going in the wrong direction with the financial strategy and with the trends of the financial strategy. For the railroads, you have a lot of investment in equipment. You need to have a long-term financing and a low rate of interest so that with the tariffs you could self-finance infrastructure in railroads in the cities or in the intercity roads. So how do you have an idea how to break this vicious circle?
Carlos, thank you very much. I'm sure that Doris will be able to answer your question because Switzerland, in a way, has answered the question. But I'm going to answer that second question, and we'll keep both questions in mind simultaneously.
Yeah, hello. My name is Dirk Peters. I work for the German Energy Agency, which is also dealing with energy-efficient transport, obviously. And I saw in today's debate, but also in the forums and plenums yesterday, like a common subject of that consensus which we need among the different stakeholders on this complicated and rather unpopular subject of finance of transport and how to spend the money and where to get it from. And the question arises, how can we get this consensus, especially knowing that the subject is very difficult to explain to those which go to the vote at the end of a legislation period. So this question goes to Switzerland, I think, but also to the other speakers which have ideas on how to get to this consensus in Germany.
Thank you, George. So, we're going to respond to those two questions. And Doris, in a way, I'd like to throw in a third question, which was implied to be by Mr. Ando. I mean, he is talking about future subsea tunnels. I mean, apart from the capital cost, I tremble to think what is the maintenance cost of such structures. You are shortly to complete the deep Gotthard tunnel. Maybe you could tell us what its capital cost is. Maybe you could tell us what its maintenance cost is. I mean, I suspect maintenance cost is, I don't know, 4% a year or something of capital cost. I mean, these are extraordinary numbers, are they not?
Well, I think the man from Mexico was totally right on the road. I think was also on the panels in this morning here, PPP or self-financing system is possible. And therefore, I think governments should really concentrate on public transportation. Here, you will never get a profitable system. Never.
In railways?
In railways. Public transportation, well, may also be the bus system because, well, the services may be profitable, but the infrastructure with the maintenance, well, in Switzerland, I must tell you, we have about 50% cost, payback on the cost. So this means the consumer, at the end of the day, pays also 50% of the cost and 50% is public money. And I think here governments have to decide and perhaps also concentrate their money when looking for financing really strategically invested in public transportation. We have pension funds which we allow them that 15% of their capital can be invested in infrastructure. So I think here really government have something to do. On roads, I think for many countries, PPP here can really be a good solution, or that the drivers are ready to pay with toll systems or with other taxes, or the costs of infrastructure and services. We are, for the moment, in 3 years it will be open, the Gotthard Tunnel, this will be the longest railway tunnel of the world. We think it's possible because with the European Union we have a strategic corridor from Rotterdam, so the Nordic Sea, to the Middle Sea. So we are very happy that we have a European view how the corridors, especially for transport of goods, will function tomorrow in 10, 20 years. So the investment is also coordinated with our neighbors, that we can have a certain amount of containers of goods on this line through the Gotthard, so that the capacities are here, are guaranteed, and this is for the operators then a better cost model than when they don't know, when there's no planning, when there's no strategy with the whole corridor. But it's clear this will cost something, but our population is ready to do that because they think, well, if we would have all these goods and personal transportation on our roads, the highways would be crowded and we would have more congestions every year. So this is also costs where a society has to stand through. And this perhaps to the last question of the German man, I think transparency towards our citizens is important. Discussing the issues of infrastructure, but also the chance for a society when you have excellent quality of infrastructure available. People understand that. When a service is good, they are ready to pay also something. For countries where you have low salaries and where we have low tax revenues, it's a difficult question to invest. Here, really governments, the World Bank, and I think PPPs can bring a solution until the financing or self-financing is a reality. But talking about the need and the chances of infrastructure, getting the priorities, like also France and Norway put it out, I think this is important, and people are ready that a certain amount of government money, of public money, is spent on infrastructure, because it's our future. It's the future, and it's prosperity. It's also part of our globalization, I think.
And very briefly, would you confirm what I think to Carlos, which is that you have very specifically and overtly made the road user not only pay for the roads, but cross-subsidize the investment in railways?
Yes, we have a heavy vehicle fee, and most of this heavy vehicle fee goes to railway infrastructure. That's correct what you say. And the sector was ready to do that because they could increase the productivity. Before we had a lot of vehicles empty or half empty, since they have to pay the heavy vehicle tax. Well, logistically they made a lot of progress and the productivity increased. So actually it was finally a win-win situation for railway financing, but also for the transport sector.
It probably helps too that quite a lot of the lorries are non-Swiss, they're foreign. Terje.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, you need a microphone, sir.
Sorry. Yeah. We also cross-subsidized in 2 cities, but most of the project is toll projects for a concrete construction. And I thought I should say something about subsea tunnels, because we have near to 30 subsea tunnels, and in addition to the maintenance cost, we have the operation cost. And annually, I think we have a cost up to 100,000 euro per kilometer. And today we have around 150 kilometers of subsea tunnels, I think, and the maintenance cost is huge. When we construct a new subsea tunnel, About half of the cost is equipment inside the tunnel, safety equipment and other things. And that equipment has, as I said, a lifetime around 20 years or something. Then you can imagine some of the maintenance cost. At the end, I have to say that even bigger budgets are scarce. And of course, we have changings in the society, and both of those things call for long-term planning. We have the same situation as in Switzerland, annually budgets. But 10 years plans helps us a lot. Because when we look back to the 3 previous transport plans, the government has followed up with the money. So we trust the plan which was presented last month, and as I said, a huge increase. And it's very good to have such a long-term plan, especially because we have to live with the annual budget system.
Very good. We really are pretty much out of time in this discussion. I was just trying to make a note here because it occurs to me that we very often have panel discussions which go through all the challenges and the difficulties, but don't very often deliver answers. But I think this afternoon's panel has, in a most interesting and consensual way, come up with rather a large number of answers and agreements. And if I could summarize, I think the panel is pretty much agreed that countries need to have national plans. If they want to have an international frame of reference, they should be thinking about 3–4% of GDP being spent on transport. That national plan needs to have political consensus, and it needs to have the consensus of the public. Maybe the way to go is the French model, to establish a committee of politicians and experts that develops the plan so that it has a certain amount of consensus to begin with. And then it's important to translate that into a multi-annual plan and multi-annual budgets. Within that plan, it's bound to be the case, I think, that maintenance is going to be a priority over new investments. And in doing that, civil servants may have to restrain ministers who will be very, very keen to build new projects. And as you make maintenance your real priority, make sure that you really know what maintenance costs. Don't be optimistic about it. The more complex the projects are becoming, the more the maintenance is going to cost you, and you need to know that that's happening. On PPP, use PPP for the bread and butter stuff of every day. Don't be too ambitious with PPP. Use it for simple stuff where people understand the risks and can see lots of examples of how the thing already works. And two broad strategies. For interurban transport, you want to be looking much more at railways than you are at roads for future development. And within cities, you want to be thinking about the way in which you can maximise the ability of people to cycle and to walk for all sorts of reasons, health reasons not least. But you need to be thinking then in terms of urban design about how you can get people out of their cars. Well, I think that has been a very valuable session. I very much hope that you all agree. I want to say thank you very much to the translators. I want to assure you, Mr. Ando, that we had a marvellous translation of your contribution. So the fact that you were speaking in Japanese and we were speaking in English in no way disadvantaged the exchange of ideas in that passage. So thank you very much indeed to our interpreters. And then thank you very much to all of you on the panel. Thank you, Terrier. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Doris. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Mr. Ando. Thank you, Michael. Perhaps a round of applause for our panelists, please. Okay, now I want you please to remain in the hall because for the next 15 minutes we have a very delightful awards ceremony. I'm going to ask the panelists if they would like to take their seats in the body of the hall. We're going to do a little bit of furniture moving and then we're going to introduce the awards ceremony. Thank you all very much indeed.